They got Willa. They got my daughter. I need to find her. Ah!
From acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson.
You can save that girl.
Today, experience what is being called the best movie of the year.
This is the end of the line. Not for you.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity.
Let's go! Here I am.
One battle after another. Now playing only in theaters. Experience it in IMAX. Rated R. Under 17 animated without parent.
You can't hide.
Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to our weekly episode of On This Week on Haway The Podcast, as we get right into the thick of the action of the season after talking about season openers and pre-seasons and new signings. We're getting right into the thick of the action now because we talk about plenty of games gone by, because today we're looking at September the 15th through to the 21st of September down through the years at Sunderland AFC. And I'm particularly excited with this one because it includes the start of our European adventure from back in 1973, which I can't wait to get into. But first, I need to introduce the two gentlemen who will help me look back on all of this. And without the services of Martin or Andrew today, we have a super sub on the scale of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer today because we have Gavin Henderson to join us. Hello, Gav.
Hey, mate. I don't know about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I think, what did I say to you lot? It was a bit like when Reggie chucked in Joe Anderson at the end of last season, I think. more along those lines than someone like little Ollie like. But no, I'm glad you think that highly of us, mate. Anyways.
Well, Joe Anderson's not a bad player, though.
Well, you know. Go on, well, yeah, right, okay. Yeah, he's all right, I suppose, for a team that's in the middle of League One. We're Premier League champions to be now, man, Kelvin.
Oh,
Got to move on.
Well, I did have Thomas Hauser in the notes before I started, but I thought, no, I'll be nice. But Gav, I mean,
it depends which side of the argument you come on with him, by the way, because my dad hated him. I think I've mentioned that before. But then other people didn't think he was too bad, did they?
Yes. So, yeah. What was he called? He called himself Goal Machine. But anyway, I'm sure we'll have a big segment on Thomas Hauser at some point. But Gav, I mean, just because as I said, super sub. I think this is the second one you've done. But but we always, we love our On This Days on the Report website, and we love getting into them. And you were just saying that, when we're doing these, you're actually looking back through all the articles that we've put up there for this period and kind of reading through them.
Yeah, well, that's it. We capture, in what we do on Rote Report, we are capturing history. Like, you'd like to think the website will stay stable forever, and in 100 years, 50 years, whatever, people will be researching things. Even this brilliant summer that we've had and the end of last season, and God knows what we're going to go on to do. You would like to think that people will go back and look at stuff we've all written about this period in time and think that's the way it was, Hopefully we're capturing the feeling at the moment. But no, with some of the other stuff we're going to go on to cover today, the website was operational at that time, and we've also covered off bits and pieces on the On This Day feature that we've now been running for 4 and a bit years. I mean, God, where's them years gone? We've been doing this since COVID times, really. And I think, when you look at it over the span of it, not to blow too much smoke up our own arses though, but there ain't much else out there unless you go digging through the archives like you lads do every single week and then doing these podcasts. There's other than the brilliant books of Rob Mason and other historians and stuff, easily accessible historical information about Sunderland is not really anywhere else apart from on our website in the detail that it is. And I don't mean to do a disservice to anyone else. I think StatCat are fantastic. Like I said, Rob Mason's books are fantastic. And like I say, if you can afford a subscription for the British Newspaper Archive, you can do all your own trawling. But I think people might get a lot of value out of the stuff you're doing. So it's actually more hats off to you because I'm just an observer most of the time. I'm not really involved, but yeah.
Well, yeah, and just on StatCat, we'd really struggle without StatCat. So thank you to whoever, all the people who do that. We do appreciate it.
Well,
and
actually, can I just say on that as well? Sorry, Chris. When we first started doing On This Day, it was the fellas over at StatCat who used to email us all the information about what had happened on that day, and used to send us it all over an email format so that we had something to go from. So without their help, we wouldn't have probably ever started the feature. So yeah. I think it's probably fair to give them props.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And also, of course, on the subject of our On This Day piece, we also, for the Soup Kitchen, I want to say 2 years ago now, I think, might have been more, but we did a SAFC 365 where we put adapted versions of the On This Day pieces into a book. So anyone with a copy out there might have it open as we're going through some of these, because you might recognise one or two. And one of the writers, you might have heard him already giving these one-liners. We weren't even 2 minutes in, and he was trying to stick one of his one-liners in there. But yeah, one of our writers from On This Day pieces. Of course, it's our lead Jackanoria himself, which is, of course, Kelvin Beattie. Hello, Kelvin.
Good morning, lads. How are you doing? Is it
good.
still morning? Where are we?
Yeah, exactly. Well, with Sunderland at the minute, we're just aiming for Saturday,
Morning
so
somewhere.
it doesn't really matter anything else other than that. But yeah, Kelvin, I was going to say, last time you talked about Colin Todd, and we talked about last time. I think last time you got poked about Dennis Tueart or something last time, and this time you're getting poked about some things you mentioned about Colin Todd.
It was Bobby Kerr, and it was all good banter.
Okay.
It was all good banter. So a bit of feedback from the. There were two things that I've had a bit of feedback about after last week's On This Week. The first one was the discussion about Colin Todd. Lots of lovely bits of feedback from people who were just saying, "Oh, he was my very favourite player when he played." But I did say I misspoke on This Week last week, and I did say that Howard Kendall played in the same Chesterley Street boys team as Colin Todd and Colin Suggett, and actually it wasn't him that I was thinking of. So Howard Kendall did play for Chesterley Street boys team, but he's a bit older than Suggett and Todo, so it was a few years before. The lad I was thinking about was a lad called Keith Felton, who played in that Chesterley Street boys team that got to the schools trophy final and played against Erdington and Saltley. And Keith, like Todo and Suggett, signed for Sunderland on youth terms. And played in the 1966-67 team that got to the Youth Cup final, and actually played against Birmingham in the Youth Cup final and won it. It was a two-legged affair, and they won both games 1-0, and got a little bit of revenge over Erdington and Saltley. The captain of Erdington and Saltley that day was a guy called Stephen Lee, and he was also the captain of the Birmingham youth team, who Suggett, Felton and Todd beat in the finals. So a little bit of revenge for that defeat. There's a great video of that schools trophy final on YouTube, and it's in one of our Roker Report articles. If you love all that sort of stuff, it's well worth a look. You get some great views of the crowd, and there's some very nice names mentioned in that trophy final. And the size of the crowd as well for them lads. There's over 20,000 people watched that game at Roker Park. So fantastic stuff for 15-year-old. Another thing that I had a bit of feedback about, we had a brief discussion about Geordie Mulhall last week, and I said that he was part of a foursome, George Mulhall, who tied our left-hand side down for a lot of years, and that, you know, it was a very, very well-oiled left-hand side, and that was George Mulhall, Johnny Crossan, Jim McNabb, and last week I said it was Cease Irwin. Well, it wasn't. For those, I've had a number of folk who said to me, now Cease Irwin did actually play a couple of games at left back, but of course it was the other half of the Flower Pot men, Lenny Ashurst, who was the fullback for most of that time on the left-hand side. So my apologies for that, misspeaking twice in the same show. Terrible.
How dare you, Kelvin? How dare you make mistakes?
Well, that's it. You know, we have said that, you know, sometimes we're going from memory, and sometimes we've got the information. We try to have as much information in front of us, Kelvin. But the little bits and pieces, though, Kelvin, you knew because they're probably not in any book or stuff somewhere, but it's just that you know them, and people who were there know all that information.
Yeah. Well, it's really, the vast majority of feedback's really, really nice, Chris.
Yeah.
I was, you believe it or not, I was sitting in the sauna at my private health spa, Concert Baths, and somebody came in and just said to me, I was listening to you last week, man. He says, what's going on? It wasn't Cease Irwin. It was... You've got nowhere to hide when you're sitting there in your bathers, man. You know, I said, all right, okay. I'll put that right on next week's pod. Don't worry.
Well,
very
that's a
good.
new one.
Very good.
That's a new one for Haway the Podcast. Have you been pulled when you're in the sauna, Gav, on anything you've said on the?
I've had somebody say, "Oh, don't you do that podcast?" when I've been in a sauna, genuinely.
Okay.
And then the same lad, but the lad who it was, he worked there, and then I think he left after a little while. But yeah, he would come up to us quite often and be like, "Oh, I was listening last week," and this, that, and the other. So strangely, yes, I have been accosted in a sauna because of this podcast, but not to be put right on something, thankfully.
Well, I feel like the odd one out, the only one who hasn't been pulled in to sauna to talk about Haway the Podcast. But anyway, look, let's move on. Cheers for that, Kelvin. Because Andrew's not with us today, obviously, but he did make sure that I was going to mention last week's quiz question. Because last week, Andrew asked, who was the first person to score a penalty for Sunderland? And I don't know if either of you have done your homework and know the answer. No, silence.
Do you know, I don't, but I know who the first person to save one was.
Oh, right. Well, give us a second then, because the answer to Andrew's quiz question was John Auld. He scored in a 4-3 defeat at Bolton Wanderers on the 19th of September, 1891.
Well, I was at that one. I was at that one. I remember that game.
The way I feel at the minute, I feel like I was at that one. But the most records originally said it was Hugh Wilson. But in recent years, following additional research, and I'd imagine it was by Rob Mason, can't imagine anyone else dug this deep, but with the extra research, it's been corrected to John Auld. So go on then, Kelvin. Who was the first one who saved a penalty?
Ned Doig.
I didn't know that. I've heard, I obviously heard of him, but and know who he is, but didn't realise he saved the first penalty. But there you go. And if that's a quiz question in the future, then everyone knows the answer now. So it makes you make a note of it for future editions. But look, let's get into it, because yes, so you can shout up next time it's done. Right. So let's get into it. So our first day, we're looking at September the 15th down through the years. And we start with 1890, because we mentioned Sunderland's entry to the Football League last time around. And this time in 1890, it was we lost our second ever league game, 4-3 at home to Wolverhampton Wanderers, and long-serving goalkeeper William Kirkley was blamed for letting a 3-0 half-time lead slip, although Kirkley was reckoned to be ill after this game with the news reports. But that's what happened back then. Then we moved to 1954. Centre-half Fred Hall made his final appearance for the Black Cats in a goalless home draw with Wolves. 1958 on September the 15th saw the birth of goalkeeper Chris Turner in Sheffield. And then we moved to 1992. Kelvin, big grin on his face with Chris Turner, who we've talked about a little bit in the past, and I'm sure we'll mention again. But 1992, Sunderland are beaten 1-0 in front of just 5,871, and I was one of them. I've got a signed programme from this game because we got beat 1-0 against Birmingham City in the Anglo-Italian Cup, which was the reason for the low attendances and the reason why the Anglo-Italian Cup didn't hang around for too long, Kelvin. But actually, Kelvin, just quickly, because I was gutted in 1992 that Sunderland didn't play any Italian opposition, because Italian football was massive early in the 90s. But Anglo-Italian wasn't anything new, because it was in the 70s, wasn't it? And then
yeah. We had some touchy games against some Italian teams. I'm trying to think of who they were. Cagliari was one of them. They came and kicked anything that moved. They were kicking ball boys, St. John's ambulance men, bloody everything. It was a hell of a game, that, as I remember it. And the going back to the 70s, I don't think I'd be wrong in saying the crowds never really took to that tournament. Not really. It was usually there were touchy, hard games. I think I've seen about 3 or 4 Italian teams, 3 maybe play us in that tournament. I cannot remember who they are just quite at the moment, but yeah, definitely that game is against Cagliari stands out. Lazio might have been one of them as well, if memory serves me well, but I wouldn't trust me this morning.
Well, yeah, in the 90s it was a bit crap. We had 2 pops at it, and in this one in 1992, we were in a group with Birmingham City and Cambridge, and we lost against Birmingham on, as I said, the one I've mentioned, and we drew against Cambridge. And
just reading about
got knocked out.
Just reading about it, yeah, Chris. And I don't know if you were going to come on this or not, so apologies in advance. But it was re-established in 1992 for second-tier clubs, wasn't it? So it was only second-tier English and second-tier Italian clubs. So it didn't quite have the allure of playing the Italian big boys.
But there were still some big clubs in Serie B back then. And, of course, I was, I think, the first iteration of you could be Italian clubs and Championship Manager. So that's when it all blew up for me around that time in the early. I actually knew who the teams were back then. But yeah, I think the crowds of around 6,000 put paid to that and put it in its place, and it disappeared. Well, let's move on. 1998 on September the 15th, Sunderland set themselves up for a comfortable passage through the next round of the League Cup as we beat Chester City 3-0 at home in the first leg of the second round of the League Cup, as we said. Go on, Gav.
Yeah, that game stands out because wasn't it the game where Kevin Phillips broke his toe?
Yeah, and I think Martin's mentioned this before, that it was absolutely ridiculous that he wanted to play. But thinking back, it was like the season before he was banging them in, and I think he just had it in his head that, and I think he basically forced Reed's hand, didn't he? Just basically because he wanted to bang the goals in.
Well, he scored on that day, yeah. We took the lead through Martin Scott on 32 minutes, and then 7 minutes later, Super Kev put one in just before half time, but then went off in the 52nd minute with a broken toe.
That'll teach him to want to get into double digits, mind. Yeah.
There we go. 1-0, Kelvin.
Yeah, it doesn't take him long. But actually, it's true. If you look at that team, it's a really rotated team, because you've got Neil Wainwright in there, John Mullen in midfield, Phillips is up front with Danny Dicchio. You've got, you could even look at Martin Scott at the back, who, at that point had been second fiddle there to Mickey Gray. but still, Kevin Phillips up front, and he lasted 52 minutes, like you said, before he had to come off in a meaningless game. But yeah,
what level would Chester have been playing at then? Were they like third tier or fourth tier or something?
I think they would have been fourth tier. I think my guess.
And then you look on the bench and you've got Michael Bridges sat there, and you think, shouldn't he have been playing? And what might it be? I know we went on to have a brilliant season anyways, but imagine how many goals he would have got if he hadn't broke his toe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just out of interest, Kevin Ratcliffe was manager of Chester City back in the day.
Well, hey.
People remember from his Everton days. So
he was a handy lad, wasn't he?
Well, are you going to
always liked him?
Oh, well, you can imagine Peter Reid and Kevin Ratcliffe having a few beers after that one, can you? Talking about back in the day. But we move on to 2007, and we've talked about it a lot, but I actually just want to touch on this day, actually, because on September the 15th, 2007, Sunderland beat Reading 2-1 at home. It was actually Roy Keane versus Steve Coppell in the dugouts, Kenman Jones and Ross Wallace scoring the goals. It was in front of around 40,000, but it was the day when everyone paid tribute to Ian Porterfield, who we talked about last time. But it was the 1973 team got back together, laid tribute on the pitch, and there was a lot around. Remember around the Bob Stokoe statue outside. But Gav, I don't know if you can remember the day, but it just had a strange feeling, didn't it? It was kind of, and the whole everything that they did before the game, just paying tribute to Ian Porterfield. You could kind of feel it, couldn't you?
Yeah, obviously he's a massive figure in the history of the football club, and I mean, there's not many people will ever go on to say that they scored the winning goal for Sunderland in a cup final. And Ian Porterfield, obviously, he lived his life after that point as a Sunderland legend. So it was a sad day. I mean, very similar to, I can remember around the time Bob Stokoe died as well. And there's just a different feeling, isn't there, when a genuine club legend passes away, than not to do down anybody else associated with the football club who's ever lost their life. Of course, we still pay tribute. But when somebody who is so closely associated with the very fibre of the club passes away, it's huge, isn't it? And Ian Porterfield was, and still is to this day, a massive figure in the football club. And it was only last week, Chris, you had Richard Short on the pod, whose middle name's are Ian Porterfield.
Yeah.
Which goes to, and I wonder how many children born in the 70s were either called Ian or had the middle name Ian. My middle name's Ian. I don't know whether it's got anything to do with Ian Porterfield, but I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah. I mean, that day was strange. It was strange for a number of reasons, really, not just because of the sad passing of Ian Porterfield, but we were on such a high, having got back into the Premier League, and obviously we win that game, and Kenman Jones scores his first Sunderland goal. If I remember right, it was a cracking goal as well. He kind of turned and lashed his boot at it at the edge of the box and went into the bottom corner. But at least we managed to win the game and paid tribute to Ian Porterfield in the best possible way.
Yeah. Just quickly, Kelvin, I don't know if you've got any memories of that day, because
definitely, and obviously having lived through I saw Porterfield's debut, so he was a player I grew up with and loved, loved watching him play. I'll get it in early this week, Chris. I always wanted to be like him when I played.
That's another one we'll add to the list.
But I mean, we had to, as a club, pay tribute. But one of the things that struck me about that game, and it's not the first time it's happened, it sort of dumbs down the performance a little bit. You feel like the crowd and the team aren't quite, and I felt a bit churlish for saying that because, as I say, I grew up with Ian Porterfield, and I thought it was a lovely tribute to him before the game, but then the game seemed to take our crew seemed to take a wee while to get warmed up to the game. For me, it was a almost sad kind of atmosphere in the place. It's a hard balance, that, I think, getting a tribute right to people. because you kind of feel a lot of people, I mean, you get this with so-called ordinary people. They don't want people to be maudlin. They don't want them to be sad. They want them to remember the good times, and remember them for everything.
Yeah.
So how do you get that right? I'm not sure. I do remember it, though. And great to see all them 73 lads on the pitch. You would have rather had them on there for a different reason, but it was still nice to see them, for sure.
Poignant as well. We played against one of the teams he used to manage as well.
Yeah.
Spent 20 months in charge of Reading in the 90s, didn't he? So, yeah, was that little detail as well?
Knocked us out of the FA Cup when Dennis Smith was manager. Ian Porterfield's Reading side, early 90s. I think might have been 89, 90. I can't remember now. But yeah, I was just thinking about when you were talking about getting that tribute right. I've heard Neil Warnock say, basically when he goes, he wants everyone, all the grounds around the country, to shout Warnock as a beep for for a whole minute. A beeper.
I could manage that.
Well, that's what he said he wants everyone to do. But anyway, let's move on to September the 16th, and we go back to 1922 to start off with. Sunderland's most prolific league goal scorer, Charlie Booker, netted 4 times in a 5-1 victory over Bolton Wanderers at Roker Park.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
For a limited time at McDonald's, get a Big Mac extra value meal for $8. That means 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, and medium fries, and a drink. We may need to change that jingle.
Prices and participation may vary.
And then we move on to September the 16th, 1936. Now, this is where you lads might have to kind of indulge us for a second while I kind of talk about this, because this was the Battle of Britain in 1936, and I found this quite an interesting one because look, going back, around that time, we go back to the 30s, and Sunderland finished runners up to Arsenal in Division 1 at the end of 34-35 season, and the following season, Johnny Cochrane's side kind of returned in style, and we won the league title in 35-36, and that was despite losing at Highbury 3-1 on the opening day of the season. But we went top of the league early in November and stayed there until the season ended in April. We were 8 points clear of Derby County, and we were probably the entertainers that year in English football. We scored 109 goals that season, 48 more than runners-up Derby County, which is incredible, really, almost twice the amount of runners-up Derby County. 71 out of the 109 were at Roker Park as well, which is unbelievable. 2 players that season scored 31 goals in Division 1 for Sunderland, Bobby Gurney and Rach Carter, and Patsy Gallagher, who you talked about last time, Kelvin.
Yeah.
He was 3rd top scorer with 19 goals. I think if someone gets 19 goals a season, they'll get the Golden Boot, I think, to be honest. But he was way behind Gurney and Carter. So winning the league meant that we were equal with Aston Villa at the top of the title charts, equaling their record of 6 league championships at the time. And as well as being the last time we won the league championship, it was also the last team wearing stripes finished top of the pile, of course, which still hasn't kind of happened. So the next season, we prepared for the defence of our league title, and we knew that we would be taking part in the traditional Charity Shield, which was held at Roker Park that year. And actually, that made it only one of only 6 grounds that's hosted the occasion for a single year, in addition to 9 that's hosted the game multiple times. And it wasn't actually until 1959 when that fixture became the permanent curtain raiser for the football season. And actually in the 36-37 season, the Charity Shield wasn't scheduled to take place until late October. But a month before that, so the day we're talking about, the month before that Charity Shield game, Sunderland had another fixture. And this was, as I said, the Battle of Britain. So it was actually what was back then, it was the English and Scottish champions exhibition. And so in this case, it was the game between the champions of England and the champions of Scotland. And it had only begun a few years prior in 1933. And it came about as a friendship between the manager of Arsenal at the time, who was Herbert Chapman, and the manager of Glasgow Rangers, who was Bill Struth. And that's how it all came about in 1933. And a little bit like the Charity Shield, it had a competitive edge to it. But at the same time, it was called an exhibition and it had that kind of air about it. But the winners would, just like the Charity Shield, the winners would celebrate suddenly after the final whistle, and the losers would say they don't care. But obviously, if the role reversal, obviously the opposite was true. So our opponents would be Celtic on this occasion. They finished 5 points above Rangers and Aberdeen at the top of the Scottish League. And it sent thoughts back to 1892 when we played Celtic in a similar game that was dubbed at that time the Championship of the World, which Sunderland won both games at Roker Park and Celtic Park back then. So we can claim we were world champions back in 1892, of course. Not to sound too much like West Ham fans, but we'll move on from that. But this time around, in the 30s, both games were scheduled in the opening 5 weeks of the season. First game was at Roker Park on the 16th of September, as we said. By this time, Sunderland had already played 5 league games, and it wasn't quite going to plan. We'd lost the 3 of the opening 5 games, and 4 days prior, we'd gone down 4-1 at Arsenal in London. And as well as kind of the form that Sunderland were in, the fixtures were a bit controversial, and it was kind of an opportunity for entertaining visitors in the town as well. And the controversy was around the price of tickets. The general feeling was that it should be lowered because it was taking into account that it was an exhibition and the nature of the game. Season ticket holders were able to enter as they would for a standard league game, but that left the majority being priced out of attending the game, especially because there was a home game just 3 days later against Brentford. And there was a letter into the Daily Sunderland Echo Ship and Gazette, and it summed up the feeling around it. It was titled kind of, "Should Prices Be Lower?" And it said, "Sir, prices of admission to Sunderland versus Celtic match on Wednesday are absurd. Supporters from the districts will find it an expensive afternoon's entertainment with nothing being at stake. May I advise the directors of both clubs not to be so tight-fisted and let the supporters see they can be so generous as to reduce the prices for what is simply an exhibition of football. Exhibition football does not always win a game. It's goals we want and plenty of them." And it said that was from Club Pigeon, but I don't quite know what that means or who that was from. But there you go. That was the letter. There was also a bizarre story that was reported on the day of the game in the Daily Herald. And this stated that Sunderland players were banned from playing golf after Tuesday during each week throughout the season. No official explanation was provided by the club, but it was thought to be an attempt to stop the players from going for a round of golf on the morning of a game. And then there was another really strange one. There was the tale of the treatment of the crew of the HMS Cairo in the build-up to the game. The Sunderland Council General Purposes Committee, which is a mouthful, had decided not to entertain the crew when the ship visited the port on the day before the game. So an emergency meeting was then held where the chairman of Sunderland Association Football Club, Sir Walter Rain, described some proposed hospitality to be an effort to maintain the dignity of Sunderland. He spoke as chairman of Sunderland. He said that his directors would welcome the officers and men to the match. And he also added that it is unfortunate that the socialists should have taken such a foolish action. So not much changes there. But from a Celtic point of view, taking the trip south was looked upon as a huge risk, given they would be travelling back to take on Rangers, who were up next. And the Dundee Evening Telegraph questioned the wisdom of the timing of the fixture. It said, "Isn't it strange, therefore, we find Celtic engaged in a midweek friendly on the eve of their important game with the Ibrox rivals? Not that I'm against the Scottish Championship champions meeting the champions of the South. I think it's quite a good idea to get to know the relative strength of our teams compared to those across the border. But with all its apparent risk of injury before a match in which losing of points may be vital at the end of the season, well, I ask you." Well, but so that was controversial north of the border. Along with the crew of the HMS Cairo, the Journal reported that 17,000 people were in attendance for the game, which kicked off at 5:30. It had also gone unnoticed, especially in the north of the border, that Sunderland's starting 11 contained 7 Scots. And it was a side that actually, bizarrely, only saw 2 changes from the one that turned out against Arsenal in the previous game. And another aspect to the starting lineups was the 2 goalkeepers. They, well, unfortunately and very sadly, they both replaced goalkeepers who had tragically died as a result of incidents that occurred on the pitch. Joe Kennaway in the Celtic goal replaced John Thompson in 1931 after he fractured his skull in front of around 80,000 people at Ibrox in a collision with Sam English. And the 22-year-old at the time, he was taken to hospital but died of his injuries later that evening. And in the Sunderland goal, we had Johnny Mapson, and he'd replaced Jimmy Thorpe, of course, who only months after the 22-year-old again was the subject of some rough challenges at Chelsea in February 1936. He died after collapsing at his home a few days later. But other news, Celtic decided not to risk starman James McGrory, I'll say that right, who was returning to fitness. He scored an incredible, I found this is amazing. I don't know whether it's an indictment of Scottish football at the time, but 502 goals in 477 appearances for Celtic over the course of the
Go on,
season.
Jimmy, lad.
Yeah.
Go on, son.
Yeah. But at this point, he was at the latter end of his career. But I think the Sunderland defenders were relieved he missed out. The referee was Harry Natras. He'd been in charge of the FA Cup final in 1936. But the game would end in stalemate. Rich Carter put Sunderland ahead after around 20 minutes, but we were pegged back just before the hour by a goal from Mulkey MacDonald, and it would. I mean, you can tell he's Scottish, of course, but it would end 1-1. According to the report in the Dundee Evening Telegraph, the game was a celebration of football. It said, as was anticipated, the game was of the most friendly nature. There were no unsightly scrimmages, so common nowadays in league football, and fouls were of a very minor nature. What was the result? An exhibition of football as it should be played. So there you go. And the star of the show, according to reports, was Newcastle-born Len Duns. The 19-year-old was singled out for praise ahead of more established teammates, especially for cleverly creating the opportunity that fell to Rich Carter to give Sunderland the lead. Praise was also given to the opposition in Sunderland Daily Echo and Shipman Gazette, with a focus especially on their ability to head the ball, which seemed consistently superior to Sunderland. It's they said criticism in a friendly match is always out of place because the players look upon the game as a friendly. But in this case, we certainly did see some really good football movements. And I think the crowd of just under 18,000 rather enjoyed it, especially the fine positional play and the headwork of the Celtic side. During their stay on Wearside, Celtic players were also treated to attend the first house at the Empire Theatre. And later in the evening, they visited the Sunderland Illuminations. And yeah, Johnny Cochrane's side were meanwhile focused on the visit of Brentford 4 days later. And, of course, planning for the return fixture in Glasgow in 2 weeks' time. But, Kelvin, just to come to you after all of that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm just thinking that supports the old adage that all the Scots are heed the balls. Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with that, Kelvin, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, is there an argument? I mean, are we not at the stage where it's kind of viable or to have something like that? In English Scottish Champions
Great idea. Great. So it would be great to get that going again. I would love a trip over the border to see my team play to play the league champions of Scotland. I would love that. I think it would be a really good thing. And I think some of the concerns that have been around in the past coming through the 70s, the late 60s, 70s, the 80s, you know where I'm going here, about bad behaviour, hooliganism, stuff like that. Yeah, I'm hoping that we've crept beyond that to a degree, and that can be. I think the policing of games is far more sophisticated now, and hopefully we've crept beyond this being a reason for not doing something like that. I think it'd be a good thing to explore and to get going again.
I might have told you before, but my dad always told me stories. He said his dad took him to Wembley when he was young, which must have been in the 50s, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was the biggest education he ever had as a kid, seeing those Scots in London. He said he's never seen so many people lying on the floor with empty bottles next to them. But he said it opened his eyes that day. But Gav, I mean, do you reckon there's an argument for it?
Well, would it create intrigue initially? Probably, yeah. If Liverpool played Celtic in a big game, but don't they tend to play each other in pre-season anyways? And
that's true.
Like wasn't there a game? I'm trying to think. Don't they play at like Croke Park and stuff in big friendlies, which sell out the place?
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, I know it's not the same thing, but it kind of is. It gives people what they want. I don't know when you look at how much luster it's now called the Community Shield, isn't it? But it was always the Charity Shield, wasn't it, for many years? You look how much luster that's kind of lost, and you think, do people, because the clubs won't treat the games properly, they don't treat the Charity Shield properly. They're just glorified pre-season games for the teams taking part, really. If they could find a way to make these games interesting for people, then absolutely, yeah, I would. I think there's always that argument, isn't it, about how Rangers and Celtic would fare if they became Premier League football clubs, and you never get to really see it that often. I know that they do occasionally get paired up with English teams in Europe. I think Villa played Rangers last year, didn't they?
Yeah.
So it happens from time to time, but it's not quite the same. Yeah. If they can make it interesting, fair enough. I think the fact that this game that you've just talked about was kind of in the middle of the start of the season,
it was
means that can you imagine if they did that now, like 4 weeks into the season, what would happen? They'd just play a second string, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Imagine if someone got injured, you'd never hear the end of it, would you? But the game that would be it. You'd never see the game come back again if a big player got in.
Different era though, Chris, where if I want to watch Celtic play, I can turn on my telly on a Saturday or a Sunday and they'll play. Back in them days, people probably didn't know how good they were, what to expect. They probably just read the newspaper and saw that Celtic were winning 30 games on their way to a title or whatever. They probably didn't understand fully what these teams were capable of. Whereas now, if you talk to anyone about Scottish football, they just talk it down, don't they? And they say, well, them teams, they're not great. And that's the way that people think about them. And, and with the difference in the game now, where the Sunderland can get promoted and spend nearly £200 million on players. Can you imagine if you gave £200 million to Brendan Rodgers and said to him, go out and sign a new squad? I think he'd probably faint, wouldn't he? Because the money in the game in Scotland's nowhere near what it is in England. But back in them days, that wasn't quite the case. And Celtic and Rangers probably had the pick of the best Scottish players ultimately because they were the best two teams.
Yeah.
So, maybe it was more of a competition back then.
Yep. Well, moving on from those heed the balls, as Kelvin said, that's not my quote, that was Kelvin's, just to point that out. We'll move on to 1986 on the 16th of September. Central defender Nigel Saddington became the first Sunderland debutant to play 120 minutes. It was in a full Members' Cup tie against Barnsley. That went extra time and then was settled 8-7 on penalties. And he also became the first person to take and score a penalty in a shootout on his debut as well. And that was in 1986. In 2000, goals from two Kevins, Kelvin and Kevin Phillips, gave the lads a 2-1 victory over Derby County, and that maintained our unbeaten home start to the season. 2006, Tueart Watson made his debut as a substitute in Roy Keane's first home game in charge. It was a 1-1 draw with Leicester City. There was just over 35,000 there, which was an increase of almost 11,000 on the previous home game. Just very, very quickly, Gav, Tueart Watson, Does sometimes he go a little bit under the radar in that championship winning side?
Potentially, yeah, because I think we signed him at a point in his career where he was quite literally on the beach. He was playing for Sydney, and I think I don't want to get this wrong, but Roy Keane tells a story, and he was like on the phone to him while he was on a yacht surrounded by models and women and all this, and was like, "Do you want to come to Sunderland?" And he took a bit of convincing, but he did come eventually, and he was a bit surprised by the fact that he took on the challenge, you know. And when you think about it like that, because he was a playboy, wasn't he, Yorkie, and he didn't need to come and play for Sunderland, but there was obviously something there with I don't necessarily think, and he will have gone on to fall in love a bit with Sunderland, I would imagine, but it wasn't. I don't think Sunderland was the thing that brought him back to England. It was playing for Roy Keane, wasn't it? And look, I think for me, he's one of the most classy players I've seen in that position. I think these days he would struggle to get about the pitch, but back then you could stick him in front of the back four and just give him the ball, and he could do what he wanted, and it worked. You know, he was. I think them kind of players have sort of disappeared out the game a little bit. But I'm talking about Tueart Watson there as a holding midfield player who ran the game. He was never a holding midfield player in his career. He was an out-and-out striker who worked his arse off at the top of the pitch and scored goals. But as the older he got, he kind of fell back into a midfield role. And can you imagine, this was in 2006, can you imagine 10 years earlier if you'd said, by the way, we're going to sign Tueart Watson and play him in holding midfield in front of the back four? You would have went, what? But it just worked, didn't it? We found a role for him in the team, and his experience and his quality shone through. And I do think he had a lot to do with why we got promoted, because some of the subsequent recruitment of players like Carlos Edwards and Stern John, who I think Roy Keane said was his best ever signing for Sunderland, Stern John, Kelvin Jones the following season, were all teammates of Tueart Watson for Trinidad and Tobago. And you kind of wonder, did he have a role to play in those players coming to Sunderland? I would imagine he probably did. You know, the likes of Carlos Edwards, he had a great season at Luton, but when he probably found out Sunderland were interested and he could go and play with Tueart Watson, was rubbing his hands together. You know what I mean? So yeah, he was fantastic. And actually, the following season in the Premier League, I can remember thinking at the time, going, he's not going to be able to do it in the Premier League now, not at his age, you know. And he did. He was still a good option for us in midfield in the Premier League, and could still play his game in the Premier League. Not every week, mind, but he could do it. So yeah, I think he probably does go under the radar a little bit. And you saw as well, I think that following season, we signed his old tag team partner, Andy Cole, didn't we? And that was the complete opposite effect. Andy Cole was finished. We played him 14 times, I think, and he never got a goal, and he was done for. But Yorkie came to Sunderland, and I think we got a lot of value out of him as a player. I think he was massively important, not just for the performances that we put in, but the standards he set, because he came from Manchester United, where, and it's not the Manchester United of today. People listening who are maybe a little bit younger have heard all about how good Man U were, but they probably haven't seen how good Man U were. The team Tueart Watson was part of were ruthless. They were unbelievable. They were a winning machine. And you weren't part of that team unless your standards were high. And Roy Keane knew what Tueart Watson's standards were because he played with him. And whilst there was always this thing about Tueart Watson with his lifestyle off the pitch, he loved to party, he loved women, you know, he loved to drink and all that. Roy Keane knew that on the training ground and on a match day, Tueart Watson was a consummate professional. And maybe we didn't get that impression as Sunderland fans. We'd only ever kind of paid half attention to that, but also seen his name in the papers for who he'd been sleeping with that week or whatever, you know what I mean? So no, he was an inspired sign in the end. I did really like Tueart Watson.
Yeah, I agree. I did really like him, and would be one of the fans that was a bit surprised at the job that he did. I always have this thing, imagine if Yorkie had said no when Keno was on the phone to him. Yorkie's on his yacht surrounded by models. You can imagine Keane saying to him, "Where did it all go wrong?"
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to think, when you see that goal that Man United scored. I can't remember where it was now. It might have been Barcelona when the Dwight York and Andy Cole played 1-2s between each other and ended up scoring that fantastic goal. And you think, bloody hell, those two played for Sunderland. But it's easy to forget. But we'll move on to September the 17th and we'll go way back to 1890, which is where we pretty much started. Because Scottish international goalkeeper Teddy Doig, who Kelvin's already mentioned, he signed from Arbroath to replace William Kirkley, who we mentioned earlier on was blamed for those goals. We move on to 1977. This is an interesting one. I've got a question for you two on this one. Because Bolton Wanderers came to Roker Park and beat Jimmy Adamson's Sunderland 2-0 in front of over 30,000. Can you name the future Sunderland manager who scored for Bolton that day?
It wasn't Peter Reid.
It was Peter Reid. Absolutely, Kelvin. It was.
The listeners can't see this, but I was kind of poking my lugs out a bit there to try and give Kelvin a clue that it might be Peter Reid.
Yeah, and Jimmy Addison just very quickly after the game said he needed new players. He said, "We're not functioning in midfield, and midfield is the hub of football. We are not doing it there. We are short of quality. We even had players falling over the ball. A rifle is no good without bullets. I'm an utterly ruthless professional, and I'll have to get someone to do it." So that was Jimmy Adamson. Kelvin shaking his head there. So go on, Gav.
Also in the team that day was Ray Train, and I just love that name. I've always loved that name whenever I've seen it pop up. Ray Train. Yeah. What a name.
Yeah. When he signed, he got we're back on track, mind.
Right, moving swiftly on. 1981 on September the 17th, defender Sam Allardyce left Sunderland and moved to Millwall for 75,000 after only one season at the club. We moved to 1991, and this is something we're going to probably touch on next week, so I'll just leave this one because striker Marco Gabardini, he scored his last goals for Sunderland, which was a 6-minute second-half hat-trick and a 4-1 victory over Charlton Athletic at their temporary Upton Park home as they were playing at the time.
What a way to go out there with a hat.
Yes. Well, we'll talk. I imagine we'll talk a lot about Marco Gabardini next week. The other one I wanted to mention, because I dug this one out of the archives, and this was in the newspapers on September the 17th in 1992, that Tony Norman was a wanted man by a Premier League club. And I'll give you a clue who it was, because we've already talked about him, because it was a club who was managed by a Sunderland legend. I don't know if you can guess who was the legend and who was the club.
Ooh.
In Porterfield?
It was.
Yeah.
It was the club.
Would that be in Chelsea?
It was, yeah. It was in the papers that Ian Porterfield wanted Tony Norman because he had trouble with his keepers, because he only had Dave Besant fit because Kevin Hitchcock was injured. So the rumours were that he was going to come in for him. But our last one on September the 17th, 2005, an injury time goal from Zoltan Gira denied Sunderland their first victory of the season in a 1-1 draw against West Brom. But it did give us our first point back in the Premiership after 5 successive defeats, which was back in the fun days. I remember those. But we'll move on to September the 18th, 1912. Goalkeeper Walter Scott let in 4 goals home to Blackburn. That meant we'd conceded 10. Sorry, go on, Kelvin.
I was just thinking you could write a novel about this boy, mind. Walter Scott.
Oh, yeah. Yes, because Walter Scott, keeper, he let in 4 goals at home.
Again, I've just been frantically Googling that to see what the hell he was going on about. There we go. Right.
It's home to Blackburn, making it that we'd conceded 10 goals in 3 games. It was the last game as he was sacked for missing training the following day when he went to visit his mother back in 1912. And when we move on to 1917, I want to say Billy Cringen. I think I've pronounced that right. He was transferred to Celtic for £600. Sunderland needed the money to stay in business following the loss of revenue caused by the First World War. Moving on to 1965, Kelvin, I wanted to touch on you because you might have some memories of this. You wrote about it on the Roker Report website. Sunderland beat Blackpool 2-1. And 10,000 Sunderland fans travelled to Bloomfield Road, and as you described, it was blown a hooley.
Blown an absolute hooley, yeah. Aye, thanks for that, Chris. I had no memory of it when you mentioned it 5 minutes ago.
Well, it's a good job.
Absolutely none.
It's a good job before that. It's a good job that Kay Beattie writes about it, isn't it?
Yeah. But some of it has started coming back. It was blown a hooley. Loads and loads of Sunderland fans. It used to be a great. I mean, even when I was travelling, Blackpool was a great weekend. And would make a weekend of it during the 70s primarily. So it was always a great trip. Baxter joined the club. There was a bit of Baxter euphoria going on, and he did play a part in that game, as I remember. It's blown a hooley. There's not a lot of football going on. I think, as I remember it, it was quite a testy, fractious kind of game. For people that don't know, Blackpool at that time, they were a club that had a good history, and had some good players, some England internationals playing for them, and some future ones. Alan Ball was playing, and Tony Green. For people that remember him, he came to Newcastle. He was dead unfortunate. He got injured not long after he got there. And Tony Green, famously, he was the player who Don Revie allegedly tried to bribe Bob Stokoe by handing him a backhander to sell him to Leeds. And Stokoe threw Revie out of his office and got on the phone to every league manager he knew to say, I'll sell him to anybody but him. And he ended up at Stokoe's pal Joe Harvey bought him for Newcastle. And I've got to say, I actually saw him play for Newcastle. He was a lovely player, Tony Green, lovely player to watch, Scottish international. And he had his moment in that game, if I've remembered the game rightly. And Baxter was playing as well, so there was a little bit of nip in that midfield, for sure. I think that was the game, if I remember rightly. We got a dodgy pen just before. Yeah. Was it just before half time?
Yep,
right, got you. And Baxter took the pen. And Blackpool had an ex-England goalie, Tony Waiters, was in goal. And Baxter, being the kind of fella that he was being a bit shithousery after scoring it. And Tony Waiters, I think he'd volleyed him verbally and would have had him physically if he could have got at him. But apparently the crowd loved all that stuff from Baxter. It's a funny thing, isn't it? We love all these lads that have got a bit of shithousery in them. We love it all. And the other lad that scored again, if I remember it, and I'm sure, I mean, Jim Baxter, if I remembered the report, I haven't been able to get it up. But if I've remembered what I wrote, I don't think Baxter played particularly well that day. But he did set up our second goal, and that was Nick Sharkey. Nick Sharkey was a really well admired player. A player I'd just missed seeing. The 65-66 season was when I started going. I never actually saw Nick Sharkey play. And he was a guy that suffered a bit under Ian McCall, allegedly because of his religion. Nick Sharkey never got games and ended up going to Leicester. I think the Leicester manager wanted to pair him. He saw him as a good foil for a great centre forward who I always liked round about that era, Derek Dougan. The Doog, they called him. Wow, what a big, handy lad he was. But he could play a bit, Derek Dougan, good in the air, good on the ground, and hard as nails as well, but a clever player. And I think he thought that... was that Leicester manager Dave Halliday as well? I'm thinking that it might have been. So it was blown a hooley, lots of Sunderland fans there. Baxter working his ticket. Nick Sharkey gets his goal. Baxter puts the penalty in. And I think he rubs for Nick Sharkey's goal, I'm sure he robs Jimmy Armfield, the England fullback. Armfield's thinking Baxter won't tackle him because he would never, he'd never put himself out too much defensively, Baxter. And I think Armfield goes to go past him, and Baxter suddenly springs into life, nicks the ball off him, and feeds Nick Sharkey, and Sharkey bangs it in the back of the net, if I remembered that rightly. There'll be people that were at that game will be telling me I've got that totally wrong. But
well, that's what you've wrote, and you said.
All right.
Yeah, right. You said afterwards that that I think it was Hugh Fisher kind of went over the top of him and could have easily seen a red card.
Yeah. He was
Kelvin,
I did see Hugh Fisher play.
You're going to be going into the sauna this week undercover, aren't you? With a mask on.
Yeah. Well, the brilliant line from this one that you've put your piece, Kelvin. You said, had Jim Baxter played today, he would have been the king of shithouses. Which I think pretty much sums it up. But what happens in Blackpool stays in Blackpool, of course. Let's go.
Speak for yourself, Chris.
Well, that's it. Well, let's move on because there's apologies, Kelvin, but another one for you in 1976 that I wanted to hear about very quickly is the return of Dave Watson and Dennis Tueart to Roker Park with Manchester City. This is, of course, in only 1976. And Dennis Tueart scores the first after 10 minutes to go, as Manchester City beat Bob Stoker's Sunderland side in front of just over 37,000. As we're getting to grips with Division 1. But that must have been a really strange one because obviously we had to fight for that promotion, sell players like Watson and Tueart. Then as soon as we get up there, we're struggling, and they come to town and beat us with Man City.
And them two lads, they were two Bari players, two world-class players, them two. Definitely. City knew what they were doing when they came in and snatched them two away, and still held in high esteem by the Sunderland crowd. If memory serves me well, and I was at that game, if memory serves me well, I think both lads got a very, very healthy reception. And it for their goals, I think there was still a little element of gentlemanly conduct when you saw good goals. The opposition, you might give a little round of applause, a bit of applause. It's not like today where any goal by the opposition's quite often treated with derision. You bugger, I got into trouble last season for saying out loud that somebody scored a really good goal. And I said, "Oh, that was a good goal." That was about three boys turned around. Said, "Bloody hell, man! I'm standing here in my Sunderland shirt. I'm here every week, you numpties, Bloody, oh, God." Anyway, yeah, I do remember that game, Chris, and it was. It was hard when we were struggling. It was hard to see these two lads who 18 months previously, especially, and I mean, Dennis Tueart was a very, very good player, and worked his socks off for us when he played for us, but he wanted away. And there was a little element of, certainly in the crowd that day, that bugger wanted away, and worked himself out of the club. Davy Watson, there wasn't, obviously he went to City, but he stayed after 73. He stayed and tried to get up. I'm going to be talking about him in a little while.
Well, let's park that there because that must have stung, but we will get into it because of course we've got the European adventure. But
sorry, Chris, can I just quickly on that before we move on? It's interesting to me looking at this. This was 3 years on from 73, and the scale of change in the team was mental. There's only 3 lads in that starting 11 who featured at Wembley: Jim Montgomery, Dick Malone, and Billy Hughes. The rest of the team is completely different. I know it's 3 years, and 3 years is a long time, but back in them days, there wasn't the scale of turnover of players that there is now.
Bobby Kerr would still be there and still playing as well, but he might not have
presumably
been
he was
playing
injured or
that
something then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
He wasn't the unused sub either. That was Dennis Longhorn. Another
Oh,
great
yeah.
name, by the way. Just reminds us of Foghorn Leghorn, and I don't know why. Every time I see it written down.
You needed one of those penny whistles to follow that sentence there. But actually, Kelvin, just on Gav's point, did the FA Cup win almost kind of elevate some of these players where it put them on the radar of some of the clubs? And
Well, you know, you can look back on that now and say that that's what it did do. It put some of these lads out there, you know, Watson, Tueart, Montgomery, you know, but you know he would still be at Sunderland yet, and he's obviously come, but he's never really left, but he did leave. You know, it put them all out there. I think Billy Hughes probably would have creep into that. He was a really, really good player, Billy Hughes. I was always surprised Bobby Kerr didn't go anywhere. He was a very good player, Bobby Kerr. And obviously in Porterfield, he was one silky operator, Porterfield. But I think it put them out there, and I think the two players that I really felt would struggle to hang on to were the two that left.
Yeah.
Tueart and Watson.
And of course, Montgomery left to pick up a European Cup winners medal. Of course,
He absolutely did.
Yeah, which is
fair play to him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we'll come back onto some of those players because we'll move on to September 18th, 1999. Sunderland recorded their best top flight away victory for more than 52 years as we beat Derby County 5-0. Kevin Phillips' hat-trick and goals from Gavin McCann and Niall Quinn rounded off a fantastic day then. 2004, Darren Carter, on loan from Birmingham, scored just before half-time in his debut. Sunderland beat Preston North End 3-1 at the Stadium of Light. Moving on to 2010, on September the 18th, Darren Bent scored a last-minute goal against Arsenal at the Stadium of Light to earn Steve Bruce's side a point. I think Song got sent off in that game as well. Moving on to September the 19th, 1891, Hugh Wilson became the first Sunderland player to score from a penalty, which was the quiz question, of course. That was at Bolton Wanderers. The Football League had actually only introduced this rule for an infringement in the penalty area during that summer. So there you have it. 1941, on September the 19th, someone who we've talked about on this podcast on previous editions. It was the birth of Northern Ireland international defender Martin Harvey in Belfast. Yeah, and the Kelvin's got a big grin on his face there. 1962 was a momentous moment, which I would like to talk about, but probably another day because I want to move on to Kelvin telling us all about 73. Because 1962, Sunderland, it was our first game under the floodlights as we beat Standard Liège from Belgium 4-1. And there was actually a return fixture in Belgium, which actually led to the idea of the episode in Haway The Pet, apparently. That was kind of the influence behind it. But anyway, we'll talk about that another day potentially. Because let's move on to the one I want to hear about today. In 1973, Sunderland played their first game in one of the major European Cup tournaments, a cup which I really don't think they should have gotten rid of because the Conference League's crap. It was a first leg of the. I shouldn't say that actually. We've just played at the weekend.
We're playing in it in 2 years' time.
Well, that's it'll be the best tournament in the world when we're playing it. But this was the European Cup Winners' Cup for the young people out there. When all of the European sides who won their domestic cups played in a tournament, which I think is a brilliant idea. But we played in Hungary, Vasas Budapest, and I'll leave it to you, Kelvin, to tell us all about it. Because I mean, Sunderland in Europe, it's the dream, isn't it?
Sunderland in Europe. Everybody tells me that, I've got Newcastle friends who say, have you ever been to Milan? And I say, no, but I've been to Budapest, funny lad, Yeah. I didn't actually make it across there. I disappeared to Reading for a cup tie that my mother and father never found out about, but if I'd gone to Budapest, they might have found out about it, but there you go. Yeah. Cup Winners' Cup, first leg. it was against Vasas Budapest. And for the people that maybe aren't aware of Vasas, we're behind the Iron Curtain here. Hungary's behind the Iron Curtain. They were a team of that had been formed by an iron and metal workers union back in 1911, and Vasas actually means iron worker.
Oh.
That's what that means. But they weren't one of the better known teams in Hungary, like Ujpest Dózsa, who played against Newcastle when Newcastle won the Fairs Cup. That Mickey Mouse trophy that that they won in Europe. And Ferencváros and Honvéd were probably better known Hungarian teams, but they did have a bit of history. They'd won league titles, and obviously they won what was called the Magyar Kupa, which was the equivalent of our FA Cup, the same season that we won it. They had some good players, though, some very recognisable players. They were a team of Hungarians. There wasn't the influx of foreign players then, a team of Hungarians. And they had a lad playing who I always used to love, Sabo Vita, played for them. He was a cracking player. But they had a number of other internationals: Bela Varadi, Ilhas Kalman, Sandor Muller, the goalkeeper, Mazaros. He was a keeper of high renown, and a defender called Peter Torok. As well, who took no prisoners when he played. He was a good player. So that there were a team that we had to be concerned about and wary of. And I mean, by and large, we were stepping into the unknown. Sunderland. What are we going to make of it? What are we going to do? God only knows. There was about 500 Sunderland fans there. I read a great article by a Roker report writer on this game, who he did a really good job of writing about it. And there was about 500.
What was his name?
Do you know? I've forgotten. Gav, you. Gav Henderson. Yeah, that was him. Yeah. It was a good article. It got me going, got my memory buds going on about that team. We hadn't that season hadn't started well for, and there'd been a bit of rancor amongst the team. There were things going on in the background, like disputes about pay and uplifts in contracts and stuff like that. We hadn't managed to get the cup final team out that season until the Oxford game, which was 4 days before that game. And Stoker played, his cup final team played for this tie, and David Young was on the bench. But unusually, I'd forgotten all about this, to be honest. You could name 5 substitutes. And because I thought that was a relatively new phenomenon, but I'd forgotten.
Yeah,
and for this game, Stoker named 4.
Yeah,
but you were allowed to name 5.
Just very quickly on that, Kelvin, just about the cup final team. This was, of course, the last time that the cup final team played together.
Yeah. And, and then, as Gav was saying before, how quickly do they all start getting shipped out and bought, sold, shipped out, You
have to wonder by the way that the club, if this was these days, that they would be at their peak value to the football club in terms of monetary value. Everyone's looking at the players. Everyone's thinking, "Oh, Sunderland have got some canny players," and maybe that was the driving force behind it.
Yeah, and can I just ask you, Kelvin, just in terms of playing that cup side, was that the best side that Stoker could field at the time, or was it like a reward for winning the cup that they played in Europe?
I'll tell you something. We had a couple of really, really good young players who, and the one thing I would say about Bob Stokoe, if you look at our record, I take absolutely nothing away from Bob Stokoe. I loved the effect that he had on the whole of the club and supporters. I loved all that. But when you look at his record with young players, we go from the Brown years, and if you just take an overview of that, every year there's young players coming into the team. There's young players being developed, and youth plays a big part, And then Stokoe comes along, and obviously his priority is the first team, and he wants experience in the team. He wants experienced players. So the young lads, we had some great young players that moved off our book during his spell. One lad actually transfers on the day of this game, Keith Coleman, and he was a really good left back. Keith Coleman, he was a really good football player. He was captain of were 69, the team that won the FA Youth Cup in 69. He was a good footballer, Keith Coleman.
He sounds
there were
mustard.
others.
He sounds mustard, Kelvin.
Absolutely, he was hot stuff, I tell you.
Keep you on your toes.
I thought that one had sailed over his head there, Chris. I was waiting. I was thinking you were going to make him suffer there by not repeating what you said. But yeah, good one.
Sorry,
bags. I tell you what, he had bags and bags of energy, cool man. Yeah. Anyway, no, there were some good young players, and there was another one waiting in the wings at left back, of course, and that was the reason why I think Coleman was allowed to leave, and that was Joe Bolton, who was a class act. Joe Bolton. So he brought in these experienced players. He didn't want the team to get relegated. Remember that all through 72, 73, we were in a relegation fight, believe it or not, right up until the last few weeks of the season. And then that team started to come together. One of the key things, not necessarily about younger players, but moving Watson back to centre half was about solidifying the team and stopping giving away daft goals, which we definitely used to do that. We'd go a goal up, would score a great goal, and 2 minutes later, we've given away a squaffy goal, and you think, for Christ's sake, man, hang on to a lead, there were lots of games that were like that. But Stokoe definitely, he solidified the team. He'd Watson playing at the back there. He reinvigorated Richie Pitt as well. And he brought in a bit of experience like Ronnie Guthrie, who, I've said this before on here, no fault on Ron Guthrie. He absolutely did business forward, but he was a more experienced kind of player. And actually, he was in trouble before this game. He was struggling with a back injury, and we almost didn't get to see that cup final team play. And I'm told it was touch or go whether Guthrie would actually play. Difficult one. I just felt that on Stokoe the foot sort of came off the pedal a little bit with young players getting a chance in the team. I'm not saying none of them did. I'm just saying that when you come through the Brown years, where every year, there was real excitement about the players coming through, and then it just sort of dried up a bit, Anyway, getting back to that European night, so it's the cup final team. They had played at Oxford. That cup final team turned out at Oxford. And I tell you, there's a goal on YouTube. Dennis Tueart scores a goal to win that Oxford match. You want to take a look at that, mind. He doesn't half hit that ball and put it in the back.
I've seen that one before. I think I've seen it.
It's a stonking goal, Gav. I think he hits it with his right foot, if memory serves me well, from the corner of the box, and it just, it does hit that one. the people behind the goal would have been glad the nets were strong, I'll tell you, because he absolutely billows the net. Fantastic volley that he scores. But so they're coming into the game, this European tie, off the back of a good away win. Oxford were a stuffy team, and they're coming into the game off the back of 14 cup ties undefeated as well. And that's a cup team, you're feeling like you've got a bit of momentum as a cup team. We're a good cup team. And I think we were a good cup team as we showed in this game. Stoker, he was a wily bugger, Stoker, on his day. When they talk about people like he didn't have the flamboyance of Brian Clough in the things he said to the press, but when you looked at Stoker's content, sometimes you think, wow, he's working his ticket there a little bit. He was that doer and sort of stony faced, but I was looking at some of the things that he said in the press before this game. And he's like saying on the one hand, this tie's 180 minutes plus long, and we have to come out of this still in the tie. We need to come out the first leg still in the tie. And then in the next breath, he's saying, we might surprise them, we might just go and attack because we're an attack. He's dropping all these sort of conflicting hints about what he might do in the game. But you see, I think what he did know was he had some players that were quicksilver. We were, and it's almost like bringing it back to today's team. He knew that we had a pretty solid defence, a pretty clever midfield, and he had these two lads in Tueart and Hughes, who were fantastically quick and really, really difficult to keep a handle on. These two lads, and they could interchange as well. These two, that 1 minute Tueart would be fleeing down the right, and then the next minute he's on the blooming left, fleeing down the left. And Hughesy's coming in to one of his crosses. They were great interchangers in that way. And when they were both on the game, bloody hell, it was a handful. So I think he knew what he had in them two, and that he probably had the team had the cojones to soak up quite a bit of pressure and then maybe just catch them on the break, because that's definitely the way we played. We definitely played that way. So if I said to you, before I get into the game, if I said to you, do you know who Ila Benk is in relation to this game? Ila Benk.
Ila Benk?
No.
Mm.
Not sure on that one.
That sounds like a woman's name.
Ila. It is a woman's name, Gav. Well done.
There you go.
Good spot. Yeah.
Ila Benk. No, not one I'm familiar with, Kelvin.
Ila Benk is one of Vic Hallam's beloved Hungarian aunties.
All right.
Okay.
I thought I was going somewhere else.
I
was ready to say allegedly.
one of his dad's two sisters. Two sisters who lived in Budapest who he'd never met before.
Oh, right.
And in the warm-up to this game, I'm sure, I don't know whether this was the warm-up actually just prior to the game or the warm-up earlier in the day at the NEP Stadium. Ila and her sister rolled into the NEP Stadium and Vic spots them. And they're like, and they have this gathering in the middle of the warm-up, the whole warm-up has to stop. You can imagine Bob Stokoe, trying to get ready for a fucking game, and Hallam's hugging and kissing, and Ela and our sister. So it just sounded a lovely kind of thing to have witnessed that, given that they'd never met each other before, because of course they're behind the Iron Curtain, and it's terribly difficult to stay in touch at this time with relatives that are behind the Iron Curtain. And Ela and her sister were guests of honour of Sunderland for that game. They were made guests of honour and came to the game. Vic Hallam, what a character he is, man. Vic Hallam had a couple of teeth knocked out in the Oxford game, and he was. It's really hard to credit this when you watched him play and knew about all of his shenanigans, because he was a bit of a shithouser as well, Vic. And he could have been Sunderland's Liberal Democrat blooming MP if things had turned out differently. But he apparently got 2 teeth knocked out in the game. I'm sure it was at Oxford, and he was really worried about meeting the Antis looking like he did with his teeth knocked out. You know, I'm thinking, I cannot ever imagine Vic Hallam worrying about how he looks. You know, he certainly didn't play like that. You know. But it was interesting because there is a story there after the game. I'll deal with that now. It is interesting. So Hallam's dad was Hungarian. His mother was Russo-German, and they spoke German in the house growing up.
Right.
His grandfather was a Cossack who'd been killed by the communists earlier in the century. So this was his kind of heritage. And after the game, the Hungarian national coach, a lad who was called Rudolf Ilavoski, spoke to Hallam and said, would he be interested in playing for the national team? And Hallam had told him yes. He said, I definitely would be. But apparently it never happened because of the communist bloc and the difficulties involved in getting that together. But he would have been a really good addition to Hungary's team, because they were all lovely ball players, lovely sulky players. They could lay your foot on you, some of them lads, but Hallam would have definitely been. He would have been their Brian Brobby, I think.
He would have been one of 3 players to have represented Sunderland and Hungary.
Yeah.
Can anyone name the other 2 off the top of your head?
What Styles he?
Yeah, I was hoping that one was going to trip you up. Yep, Callum Styles. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think who the other.
Yeah, Martin Fulop. That's correct.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. There you go. There you go. So Vic set a trend there.
I was going to say as well, it was lucky he had no more teeth to knock out as well, wasn't it, against this lot?
He was a great character, Hallam, and that's when I imagine him seeing the Antis and just stopping the session and rushing over to them and all that, you know, because he was a real character. I used to love when he and I think he did it in this game. You know, he used to do this thing. You'd get booked for it. You could get blooming sent off for it these days. But if he tackled somebody or fouled them, he would stroll away when the foul was given and go and get the ball. But he'd take bloody ages. You'd think he was on a funeral march, you know. And he'd be like slowing the whole game up, and he'd like put the ball down, you know, and hands to the ref, you know. Sorry, ref. Puts the ball down, you know, and he's wasted about 5 minutes, and the Sunderland defence is all organised, you know. And you think, Vic lad. And the other thing he used to do, sometimes when players used to take throw-ins, he'd be standing in front of the player trying to block the throw, and the player would put the ball behind his head to take the throw, and Vic would tickle him under the armpit. He was a right bloody shithouser, so he was. He used to, but he was a hard boy, you know. He used to, in the close season, to keep fit, he used to go boxing. That was his way of keeping fit, and he used to like to get in the ring and punch people. Yeah, that could have been Sunderland's Liberal Democrat MP. Yeah, good lad. Top bloke. Cult hero with the Sunderland fans, Vic Hallam was. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to the game. For God's sake, there's a game going on here. To cut that all short, you know, we're stepping out into Europe for the very first time, stepping into the unknown. There'd been a game played on the pitch beforehand. Ferencváros had played Guardia Warsaw, and Warsaw had won. There'd been a lot of rain prior to the game, which is interesting. That must have been I don't know what you would call that, torrential sort of rain in a pretty hot climate, because I'm told the players had to stay out of the sun once they got there. They were struggling a bit with the heat. So the combination of heat and rain on the pitch, game being played on it beforehand at the at that NEP Stadium, as it was then called, and 35,000 in the stadium, along with these 500 Sunderland fans. It's a cagey start for Sunderland. Vassas are on the front foot. They hit the bar in the 6th minute. And I always remember, I cannot remember where I read this, but it was the reporter was describing Jimmy Montgomery. He was fantastic, Jimmy. Fantastic goalkeeper, and he makes some great saves in this game. But in the 6th minute, I think it was Bella Verardi has the shot, and it absolutely sails past him. And looks like it's going in the goal. And apparently all Monty could do was sort of watch it go by him, And you're thinking you're not getting any, because he had these trademark cat-like late dives, But if there used to be the scuttle about Monty that if you shot from outside the box, you stood a chance, because he was apparently long-sighted. And the reason why he made so many reflex saves was he wasn't seeing the ball until it got a bit closer to him, But that one he just watched it. Apparently the reporter said Monty stood there and watched that ball just sail. He was totally caught out by it, but it smashed off the crossbar in the first 6 minutes. It could have been a different story, if it had gone in. It's a what-if moment in this tie. I think a centimetre, a couple of inches lower, and we might have been talking a different story. But they hit the bar. But that seems to galvanise us. We'll come out. Davy Watson, who played magnificently this night. I tell you this, lad, you put him on a stage. He was the kind of player, he's playing in the 2nd division, but every time you ask him to go up a level, and he does. He just, and he gives it everything, and goes up a level. Sometimes when people are trying their hardest, the skill doesn't come out. Do you know what I mean? You get a lot of grunt and effort, but you don't get the skill, and he could do both. And he caused them a lot of trouble in attack for any corners, free kicks and stuff. He was going up. And remember that he's just 6 foot, Davy Watson. He's just short of 6 foot. He's not your biggest centre half. But he towering above his ability to jump and to hold himself caused them a lot of problems. And in the 9th minute, he puts one just over the bar, and it seems to galvanise us. We're into the game. Ian Porterfield starts getting his foot on the ball. We get a couple of breaks. They've got a lot of the ball. They've got possession, but we have a couple of good breaks where we're looking really, really dangerous. Monty has a great save to make just before half time, and that's from Sandor Muller, who used to take quite a lot of their free kicks. He was a very cultured midfield player, him. And Davy Watson makes a great last-ditch tackle right on the half-time whistle. This lad was piling through on goal, and he just got in there. Half-time, in at 0 each, still in the game, still in the tie. And you could imagine Stokoe, if he was speaking to the press, would be saying, we're quarter way through, we're still in the tie, and not letting on what he's going to do next. Because what does happen is they come out in the second half and they just keep going. They don't go into their shell. Monty has a couple of really good dives he's got a dive at a couple of boys running through at their feet, and he's got another good save to make. And then Mickey Horsfall has a great shot that's saved by that good Hungarian goalkeeper, the international goalkeeper. But Sunderland keep raiding and keep breaking well. And in the 68th minute, Dennis Tueart, who had a great game that day as well, along with Davy Watson. He gets fouled just inside their half on the right wing, and Dick Malone floats a ball into the box. And what he does is he doesn't particularly aim for anybody. He just aims to hit the space. And one of the lads I was on about earlier, Billy Hughes, comes fleeing across and back nuts it and over the hungry goalkeeper into the goal. And what a you've seen him do that a few times. If you and I'm talking about goals that you might have seen on YouTube and stuff like that. If you look at the goal was scored against Arsenal in the semi-final, it's Billy Hughes who gets the back nut on the ball before it goes into goal. So he's got this in his armory, this ability to kind of spin the ball off his head without necessarily facing the goal. So that's us 1-0 up, and they start kicking. They sort of lose the plot a little bit and start giving away fouls, and they've still got a little bit of pressure. They've still got a bit of the ball, but we're now breaking. Ian Porterfield came into his own in the last stages of the game. He was always great to have around, Porterfield, at times like that. If you gave him the ball, he'd find the easy ball out, and he just had this. Brian Clough once said it, not about him, he was talking about one of his players, but I always thought this about Porterfield. He had this very frustrating habit of passing to his own players. And that's what Porter was like. He could hit his man or hit the space. And of course he had these two lads, Tueart and Hughes, who would just run at everything. And we managed the game quite well. We get to the 89th minute, and it's Porterfield that gets the ball and plays a little pass to Dennis Tueart just on the halfway line. My memory says he's about, maybe I'll tell you he was just on the halfway line, right? And he slaloms past.
Adds a yard every year, doesn't
it? He gets further and further back, each time I tell this story. But Porterfield finds him with a nice little pass, and he's got his back to goal. He's actually facing his own goal when he gets the ball to it. But he spins, beats one player, he slaloms past another two midfielders. He gets a little break. There's a defender who just goes off his feet, but it's Tueart going one way, then the other. He kind of, if you want, in rugby terms, he sits him on his arse, is what he does with his. Is he going left? Is he going right? And then the keeper's coming out to him, and he nicks it by him and into the back of the goal. What a goal it was! What a fantastic goal! Slaloming past these defenders and putting it in. And it's when you see it in real time, it's the speed that he does it at. He was like, do you know who he reminds you of when you watch that goal? Is Ryan Giggs at his best. Wow. Ryan Giggs at his absolute best is what Tueart was like when he was in his pomp, for me. And it was a great goal. It was replayed loads of times. But he's scored 2 cracking goals in 4 days. He's on you'd want to put your money on him to get, in the next game. It was 2 cracking goals in 4 days. They win the game, they win the tie. It was a great team performance. Dick Malone, brilliant on the night. People always flagged up Dick as being a weak link defensively. He in the big games, he never was. He was somebody else that could always stand up. Ian Porterfield was silky on the night, but the whole team, Monty, Davy Watson, though, as I say, what a just a player who he just had another level in him, another gear for these big nights. He was so inspirational as well. And I know other players have spoken about that. Ian Porterfield used to speak about what an inspiration he could be. So we've got the second leg to come on October the 3rd, and rather than talk about that, hopefully we'll get to cover that.
We will
later on. one thing that did happen and that we needed to learn from and that we'll need to think about, hopefully, as time goes on with this current team, is we were playing at home against Luton on the Saturday after that game. Boy, we were jaded. It wasn't good. They looked like they all looked knackered that day, and we got beat 1-0. But what an adventure! What a great the newspapers full of it the next day. There were some great results for British teams that night, but Sunderland they got quite a bit of the national coverage, which was dead unusual, but they got quite a bit of coverage for that performance and the result.
And
it's a great memory.
Rightly so.
Welcome to Sephora.
I'm looking for a perfume that's not too perfumey.
I got you.
Serum moisturizer or moisturizer serum.
Let's get into layering.
My concealer is making me look worse.
Sounds like the wrong shade. Let's get you matched.
There's only one store that really gets what you're going for. Get beauty from people who get beauty. Only at Sephora.
Hi, Let's get you a basket.
Brilliant, Kelvin. And just to highlight that it was actually a big tournament back in the day. That G. Henderson we were talking about earlier, who wrote brilliant about this on the site. The previous final the previous year was Leeds against AC Milan. And Leeds lost their second cup final in the space of 11 days after getting beat off us. And they got beat off AC Milan in Greece the season before. So it was a big tournament at the time. But look, let's move on. Absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to hear about that second leg and actually what happened after that. But we'll get into all of that in the weeks ahead. Because getting back to September the 19th, 1998, Sunderland had a home game against Oxford United and Phillips and Quinn were out. But we still won 7-0. Michael Bridges, Danny Diccio and Alex Ray both got a brace and Mickey Gray got the other. 2001, Sunderland lost at the Stadium of Light to Glenn Hoddle's Spurs. Christian Ziege and Teddy Sheringham scored the goals. And Kevin Phillips got the one for Sunderland. Moving on to September the 20th. 1890, Doig made his debut at West Bromwich Albion in a 4-0 win. We talked about him signing earlier from our Broth. But we were deducted 2 points and fined 50 quid because he hadn't completed his necessary 14-day registration period. So he was ineligible to play.
And that was the first time a team ever got deducted points as well.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Well,
he was Ned Doig was there were firsts all over Ned Doig's career.
I bet you didn't take them as long as it took them to do the Man City thing as it took them to deduct us points. Yeah. But moving on to 1958, we've heard about all of these. Kelvin's told us about Cess Irwin, Len Ashurst and Jimmy McNabb because they all made their debuts in the home game against Ipswich Town on this day on September the 20th in 1958. Between them, they went on to make more than 1,100 appearances for Sunderland. Unbelievable. 1969, Sunderland beat Nottingham Forest 2-1 with goals from Dennis Tueart and Gordon Harris. Scored a penalty. 1995 was a busy day on September the 20th. In the afternoon, David Kelly signed for 900,000. Then in the evening, Sunderland were unlucky to come away 2-0 down from Anfield in a first leg of the League Cup second round. Mickey Gray missed a penalty in that one. 2003, I mean, we could have spent time on this one because Mark Poom became the first Sunderland goalkeeper to score in a competitive game when he leapt like a salmon at the back post ahead in the 92nd minute with a Sean Thornton corner against his former club, and it gave us a 1-1 draw at Pride Park, an unbelievable moment. September the 20th, 2004 was a sad day because it saw the passing of legendary goal scorer for Sunderland and Middlesbrough, Brian Clough. He was 69, and we've talked a lot about Brian Clough on here, so that was a sad day.
Just very briefly, Chris, I think since we're mentioning Brian Clough, there's another podcast out there which we gave a couple of recommendations. I did give a couple of recommendations for guests too, that I think if anyone's really interested in Brian Clough, they should check out. It's called the Green Jumper Podcast, and it's completely dedicated to Brian Clough, stories about Brian Clough. And the last 2 episodes have been with Malcolm Bramley, who's been on our podcast before. He's the chair of the Senior Supporters Association, and Malcolm worked for Brian Clough as a secretary at Derby County, so has a few stories to tell about Clough. It's worth checking out if people are after something else to listen to after we've completely drained them of their energy with this one.
Yeah. You can't get enough of Cloughy. You can't hear enough about it. But we get
tons of podcasts, by the way, like with loads of different guests who worked with him at various points in his life.
Well, I saw the Mark Crosley one was brilliant on the overlap when he spent just 20 minutes telling stories about Clough. Absolutely brilliant. But we get into our last day, September the 21st, and we'll go back to 1930, someone we've mentioned a couple of times already. Bob Stokoe was born on 21st of September 1930. 1935, Patsy Gallagher scored a hat-trick and Bobby Gurney got a brace. Sunderland's 7-2 home victory over Blackburn Rovers. 1957, we beat Newcastle United in front of more than 45,000 at Roker Park with goals from Don Revie and Colin Granger. Can either of you tell me who was in defence for Newcastle that day?
Was Bobby Stokoe in defence?
Absolutely was. I thought, although I wouldn't give you a clue because we've mentioned him a few times already. 1991, Sean Cunnington on the 21st of September in 1991, he actually scored the winner for Grimsby Town at Roker Park in a 2-1 win for Grimsby after Colin Pascoe equalised for the lads. 1996 was a momentous occasion as well. It was our first home win in the Premier League. We beat Ron Atkinson's Coventry City 1-0 and Steve Agnew scored the winner. But the big news from the day was that Niall Quinn got his first knee injury that day and went off injured. And he tells a good story in his book about Liam Deja's reaction to that. 1999, also a momentous occasion really, because the first Brazilian played for Sunderland. It was Marcos Di Giuseppe, known as Beaker. He played 45 minutes in the second half in a 5-0 second round, second leg League Cup victory at Walsall, and it was his only one for the club. 2004,
and then went on to sign for Walsall.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Yes. In 2004, Chris Brown made his debut and he scored twice. Sunderland drew 3-3 after extra time at Crewe Alexandra in the second round of the League Cup. But the lads went out of the competition, losing penalty shootout 4-2. And our last one of the day, it's the end of the road in 2013 on September the 21st for Paolo Di Canio. As Sunderland are beaten 3-0 at West Brom. Not a great memory, Gav, but it was a big. Everyone remembers it just because of the end of the game, don't they?
Yeah, that iconic image of Paolo Di Canio telling the fans to get their chins up with his finger pointing to his chin, and then the fans sort of remonstrating back with him, asking what the hell's going on. We'd hit a low point at that point, hadn't we? With everything, we'd ended the season before in fairly emphatic fashion. Really, we picked up a bunch of wins which kept us in the Premier League when we looked pretty doomed. And of course, the standout game was beating Newcastle 3-0 at St James's Park, which I'll never get bored of talking about that game because of just how unexpected it was. And I think I might have mentioned this before at some point on one of our podcasts, but I'd been to every game at St James's for as long as I could remember. And a couple of hours before the game, I sold my ticket on to somebody because I just thought, bollocks to it. I'm not going. I'm not going. I've seen us gone there enough times and get stuffed. I can't be arsed. I'm just going to go and watch it in the town with my mates. And I mean, I had a great day on the drink in Sunderland. I remember going outside the pub afterwards and the streets, because we watch it in the corner flag bar, which has been demolished now, I think, to make way for all these developments in the town. But we went outside and the streets were teeming with people. It was just, nobody saw it coming. So, you kind of associate that Di Canio era with that game, but you also associate it with, we talk about the summer we've just had with the players we've signed and the sheer volume of players we've signed. I think we signed 15, 16 players this summer alone. In that period under Di Canio, we signed 14. But you'd be hard pressed to sit here now and name them all because unfortunately, not many of them were a success, bar probably Vito Minoni. I don't think anybody, maybe Watmore, if you're pushing it, he did okay for us at times. But the vast majority of them players that we signed that summer were an absolute disaster.
But Gav, the opening day of the season, played Fulham, nearly 44,000 turned up. There was a lot of anticipation with that season, and 5 players made their debut that day.
Well, it was exciting. I can remember, I don't even think I was involved with Roker Report at the time, but that's when Andy came into his own. Andy Tomlinson, our transfer guru, SAFC source over on Twitter, came into his own, because at that point, he was the man finding all the information in the foreign press about who Sunderland were looking at. We brought in Roberto Di Fanti from God knows where, and he was the man tasked with strengthening our squad, and he went out and basically signed a load of players that he knew about or had mates in the game who were looking after. That didn't necessarily really suit what Sunderland needed. I mean, we were linked with some canny players, which the moves never came off as well. But it was a crazy summer. Like I said, we signed 14, but we must have been linked with 100. And there was a couple. I can always remember the name Alfred Duncan. It just sounded like a very Scottish name, that, but he was actually a Ghanaian central midfield player, who I think might still be playing actually. But he was at Inter Milan, I think. Remember being linked with him all summer, and that one never came off. I remember being linked all summer with Tom Huddleston, and that one never came off. And at the time, he was an England international, I think, but he was playing for Tottenham, wasn't he? And he wasn't getting much of a game, and he went to Hull, and we were being linked all summer with him. Another one who I think subsequently we've found out about, but apparently this is the rumour anyways, apparently Di Canio turned down Romelu Lukaku on loan from Chelsea, and instead preferred Josie Altidore, who we then went and spent a lot of money on. And Lukaku went on loan to West Brom and had his breakout season that year and scored loads of goals in the Premier League, including against us. So it was, I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, it was a disaster of a transfer window. That picture of Modibo Diakite, Ondrej Saluska, Valentin Roberge, I might have got a couple. No, it wasn't Saluska. It was David Moberg Carlson and Cabral. The 4 of them stood there, all with a scarf in the Sunderland strips. It's burned a hole in my mind, that picture, because it was just such a poor transfer window. But at the time, Chris, you're right. There was lots of optimism. I think it's something we might have talked about on another pod recently. But that summer, we actually, now looking at it, I don't understand why we were so happy. But looking at it, we had 3 pre-season games, I think. One of them was against Di Canio's friends in Italy. He took them over to Italy for a training camp, and it was played on a plastic pitch against his mates, quite literally his mates. They weren't a proper team, and we battered them. Then we went over to Hong Kong and took part in a pre-season. It was a Premier League trophy, I think it was called, or something along those lines, or the Asia Trophy or something. And handily beat Tottenham. We looked a lot fitter and stronger than they did, and Spurs were a good team at the time. And all of a sudden, you look at it and going, bloody hell, we've signed some players. Yeah, that Cabral looks all right, doesn't he? Cabral played out of his skin that day. And we're like, freaking hell, what we gone and done? Yeah, we've signed a load of superstars. And then we then a few days later played a game against Man City in an absolute monsoon in which the pitch was horrific. I mean, the game should have been called off, really. We got beat, but we were pretty noble in defeat and did okay. And then there was a hastily arranged game in Denmark against FC Midtjylland, which I think we won 1-0. Might be wrong. And that was the extent of our pre-season. I think we've just played 8 or 9 games this summer, but that was 3 or 4 games there. But yeah, I mean, what we did get to see, we were pretty impressed with. The raft of signings, the unknown names, had caught everyone's attention. And then going into the season off the back of the end of the season before, where Di Canio, let's not forget, had been serenaded on the pitch by the Sunderland fans after he kept us up. I can't remember who we played now. Who did we beat somebody right near the end of the season, and it kept us up, and he was quite literally, I mean, that video is on YouTube if anyone hasn't seen it. They played
Southampton.
Was it? Yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah. So, again, with the fullness of time, things he's looked upon completely differently. But this fella had took us to St James's Park and battered the Mags. Not just not just beat them 1-0 with a scruffy goal. We went there and turned them over big style. He then kept us up, and everyone's looking at him and going, this fella's an absolute genius. Absolute genius. What's he going to do next? But what was true was that actually behind the scenes, it wasn't quite as coherent as we maybe thought it might have been. The players weren't really having him. I've heard lots of podcasts since, not just with people who played for him at Sunderland, but people who he was managing at Swindon in his previous job, who I think they went on like a mad run, like 40-odd games unbeaten. I might be wrong, but he went into Swindon, who were in League Two, and had basically drilled them like they were in the forces, and they never had a day off for 80-odd days. But nobody could argue with his methods because the team were performing, and Swindon blew everybody away, you know. So when he came to Sunderland, he came off the back of that and tried to do the exact same things, but with Premier League footballers and not League Two footballers. When you're in League Two, it might be your last chance. If you don't get it right at Swindon, you could drop into non-league and that could be it. It's a bit different when you're trying to do it with John O'Shea and Wes Brown, who've played for Alex Ferguson for so many years, and God knows who else. And after that initial honeymoon period, it was clear it just wasn't working. And we started the season in horrendous fashion, really. It just, that first game of the season that you mentioned before, we got beat off Fulham. I remember Saluska hitting the bar, and we had a couple of half chances. Yeah, we looked okay, but we weren't fantastic. We then followed that up with a draw away at Southampton, which wasn't a bad point. We then beat MK Dons in the league. I remember being at that game, and we were terrible. We won 4-2. It doesn't look like a bad scoreline, but we were 2-0 down after 55 minutes. And he had to make a few subs to change the game up for us. And Josie Altigo got one of his only Sunderland goals that night against an MK Dons team that had Dele Alli in it, actually, which might surprise a few people. And that was and Patrick Bamford. And that was the game which kicked off the run to the League Cup final eventually under Gus Poyet. But that was the only win Di Canio got before he was sacked. And I think it was very clear watching that MK Dons game that something wasn't right. I mean, he did change the team around. It wasn't exactly the same team that had played the previous game, but it still had good players in it, And there just was something not right there when a lower league team were coming to the stadium like 2-0 up. That points to an attitude problem. We then followed that on with a battering at Crystal Palace away from home, and Palace weren't fantastic. I think they'd actually just came up, Palace, and we got beat there, and then we then played Arsenal at home, and I think that's the game. I might be totally wrong here. I think it might be the game where Altidore scored the ball was going in, the lad dragged him back. We didn't get the goal or a penalty or a red card. It was Sanya, I think. Bakary Sanya, the fullback. That's the one that points out in my mind. But we got beat then, and we dropped to the bottom of the table. And then a week later, we play West Brom at the Hawthorns. And you're looking at that and you're going, we need to win this game. We need a chance just to get out the bottom three. And on the other side of the pitch was somebody who Di Canio had bombed out of the team that summer, which was Stefan Sessegnon, who the fans absolutely loved. I know he wasn't always on his game, but when he was on his game, he was a little magician, and he could dazzle you with some of the things he could do with the ball. And because of his sergeant major-like approach to management, I don't think he was having Sessegnon at all, and he bombed him out the club, and we flogged him, I think, on deadline day. If my memory serves us right. So we didn't even replace him. We sold him to a divisional rival for a pretty modest fee. I think it was around £4 million. And he went on deadline day. We didn't replace him in the team. And then he comes up against us 3-4 weeks later for West Brom and runs the show and completely takes us to bits. And it's that typical Sunderland again, isn't it? That we go and sell basically for me, he was our best player. We go and sell him to West Brom of all teams, and then he kind of uses that as the levy to get one over on the bloke who got rid of him, and scores a goal, celebrates it rather nonchalantly, which I guess is the given thing these days, isn't it? With with players scoring against their old teams. He didn't really celebrate it, but went on to take us to bits and got subbed off with a minute of normal time to go. Full stadium applauding him, I think, even including some of the Sunderland fans. We then go down because this became a bit of a feature of Di Canio's time as manager, and it wasn't a long period he was in charge, but if it wasn't going right at half time, he'd just make 3 subs. He'd make a load of subs, and he brought poor Emmanuel Giaccherini off, who was actually a decent player who never really got a chance. He got took off at half time for Charis Mavrias. He'd made all his subs, and we got an injury late on in the game. I think it was Stephen Fletcher with about 18 minutes of normal time to go. And Fletcher, because we'd already made 3 subs, we couldn't replace him with anybody because the protocol wasn't in place with head injuries and all the rest of it that we have now. I think he had a dislocated shoulder, but he went off and we had to play the remainder of the game with 10 men. They took full advantage. Ridgewell gets a goal to make it 2-0. And then the killer blow in the 90th minute with Morgan Amalfitano getting the 3rd and final goal. And yeah, we were roundly beaten. Di Canio was on his knees for the wrong reasons in this one, and remonstrating with the away supporters. They kind of begged him to give answers as to why it was going so wrong. And the very next day, there's been a lot of rumour and speculation about what actually happened the very next day. There were rumours that a cortege of players went to Ellis Short and begged him to get rid of him. Said it's just not working. You know, he's lost us. You need to get rid of this guy. And I've had conversations with the likes of Tom White in the past about Ellis Short, and you hear some of these. He was very ripe for turning, Ellis Short. If you got him at the right moment and told him something, he would do it, and he would act straight away. He did it with a contract for this is something that Tom actually hinted on the last time he was on the podcast about a contract of a certain player who was involved at the time. Ellis Short decided on a whim to tell a load of fans that this particular player, after a man the match performance, a player they were trying to get rid of, could have a new contract, and that made things very awkward. He would, I think he sacked Simon Grayson in the tunnel after we drew with Bolton in the Championship. So he was capable of these sort of off-the-cuff, mad decisions, and I think for a long time it kept Sunderland in the Premier League. But the very next day, Paolo Di Canio was relieved of his duties and was out the door on the basis that the players had told Ellis Short, we want this guy out. An interesting period.
Just a couple of little bits I wanted to quickly mention about that West Brom side that day. Billy Jones, of course, was fullback. Nicholas Anelka was up top for West Brom and came off with around 20 minutes to go, but was replaced by Victor Anichebe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was another one I wanted to mention that for the life of me has... Oh, no, that was it. The goalkeeper sub for West Brom that day was a certain Lee Camp.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
It goes right through you, that name, when you hear it, doesn't it?
I mean, literally everything about that day just stinks, really, doesn't it? When you go at that?
Yeah. But so that sacking of Di Canio, though, Chris, it came pretty quickly. Like I said, the next day, Di Canio was relieved of his duties, and we've had a few people on podcasts and website interviews and stuff over the years where we've picked their brains on it, and you get conflicting stories on what happened. There's an interview on our website from 2016 with Craig Russell, and he was the club masseur at the time, so he was part of the backroom staff. He said, I just felt it was all about him, and I'm a Sunderland boy who wanted it all to be about Sunderland. The second season, it didn't take a genius to work out that it didn't go well and the team wasn't working under his stewardship. There was a lot of talk of players' mutiny, certain individuals and that kind of stuff, which most people seem to have felt happened, but it didn't at all. It was just the fact that the club acted fast to remove him before it was too late. You could say at West Brom, the fans had lost some faith too. The club acted quickly, not the players. It was the right decision because in 6 months we were at Wembley. But then, in an interview with the Daily Mail in 2014, John O'Shea was asked about it. John O'Shea being one of the figureheads of the squad at the time. And when asked, did the players issue an ultimatum to the board, John O'Shea said, yeah, something along those lines. It was very strange, but it was something that just had to be done. Something had come to a head, and it was plainly obvious there was only one way things could go forward. The timing of it was needed, yeah, without a doubt. It had come to a point over a couple of months build up that it was going to happen. It was incredible. The couple of days when it did happen, it was mind-boggling. Football is football. Management playing, being involved and being older and experienced player, it was definitely an eye-opener of what goes on. I'd love to tell you lots of stuff, but we're under restrictions of what we can say. It was just everything. The environment that had been created just wasn't working, so something was going to give. So that flies in the face of what Craig Russell had told us. And then in 2021, Danny Graham was on Under the Cosh, and he revealed what had happened. He said there was a big meeting. I think I was on loan again at this point, but after West Brom away, he started going through a few of the lads, and Carlos Cuellar stood up and called him a fucking prick. Any other manager I would break my leg for, but for you, I would jump out of a tackle. And then it was a conveyor belt of the lads going through him, apparently. Everyone got on a phone call the next day, and that was him gone. So I think it's a real sign of kind of the power struggle at the club at the time. You had a manager who wanted to be a manager and run everything. Say what you want about Di Canio and his beliefs and all the other things he's done in his life and career and stuff. But at the time, he was the Sunderland manager. It was his job to manage the team. But quite clearly, the players had no respect for his methods. They'd went over his head to an owner who we know was easily influenced. And the next day, he was out of a job. And yeah, I mean, it was the right decision, clearly, because, you know, look what went on to happen that year. We had a magical year, really, in the end. But you could say for the long-term good of the football club, the fact that Ellis Shaw trusted these players more than his managers might not have been necessarily the best thing. And a lot of them hung around a lot longer than they probably should have. And all these years later, we can look back at that period and go, well, you know, we're in a good spot now, and maybe you had to hit those lows to reach these highs. But I do wonder how much the players had too much influence at the football club at the time, and whether that ultimately led to our fall through the leagues. But we'll never know.
It's a good reminder about how bad things can be. But just on a happy note about that, we lost the next three. Poya took over, and our next victory was the 27th of October when Newcastle came to town, which I'm sure we might get on to.
One of them things that happened back then, Chris. Sack your manager, beat the Mags. Easy
exactly. It was tradition at that time. But anyway, look, this was supposed to be a very quick episode, and of course it's not, because it never is. So we'll just quickly do the quiz question for next time, because this is like a dagger to the heart. And if anyone wants a bit of a clue, they can listen to the Kelvin podcast last week, because we talked about him a little bit on there. But on September the 26th, 1991, Sunderland received a club record fee. Who was the player we sold, and who were the buying club, and also how much was the fee, if you know, because I do, because it's burnt onto my brain. But look, we've gone on probably a lot longer than we meant to this week, but we've had some fantastic stories. So that just leaves me to say, Gavin, thank you very much for being super sub this week.
No problem at all. I'll be Joe Anderson for you anytime, Chris.
Oh,
well, hey,
love to hear it, mate. And Kelvin, thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing about the next stage in our European adventure.
Cheers.
Good stuff. Thanks, Kelvin. And thanks again to everyone for listening. We say it every week, but we really do mean it. And of course, there'll be another episode of, there'll be another episode of On This Week next week on Haway The Podcast. I think I got that right. I might have got the words jumbled up, but I think I got that just about right. But of course, look out on the Roker Report website for On This Day pieces every single day, as well as everything else in the build-up to the next Premier League fixture and all of that. And of course, we'll have daily releases on Haway The Podcast. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.